Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
And you are very welcome to this week's episode of Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103. I'm your host, Aisling O'Rourke, and I hope you are safe and well as you tune into the show this week. First things up, we are going to be talking this week about water quality, which is something that affects all of us. And sometimes when we do talk about environmental issues, it could be argued that, well, or some people, let's just say, will choose to argue that doesn't affect me. But the long and the short of it is the quality of our water affects all of us living species here on the island. And to talk more about their latest findings, we're joined by Dr. Hugh Feeley, who is the Scientific Officer in the EPA Water Management Programme. Hugh, you are very welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much, Aisling.
Now, I know we're going to get into it in a moment or two, but in a nutshell, this latest report that you have released, can you give us an overview of your findings?
Yes, sure, I can. So we've just published our latest Water Quality in Ireland report, and this report covers 6 years of data collection from 2019 to 2024 and includes surveys from over 4,000 surface water bodies. So our rivers, lakes, estuaries and coastal waters and our canals. And we've about 500 groundwater bodies included as well. Our results show that 52% of our surface waters are healthy or in good or high ecological quality. So basically what that means is that 48%, or just under half of our national water bodies, are not as healthy and resilient as they should be. But this overall, overall our report highlights that we've a 2% decline since we last published our report in 2022.
But that 48% that are not, like that's having the finding of 52% being, in a satisfactory ecological condition, like that's good, for that 52%. But 48% not meeting that bar, it's quite an amount, really, isn't it?
Yes, it's quite stark, and there's many reasons for it, and there's many, it depends on where you are in the country as to what the challenges are. But it is something that we have. Suppose this is not new. Our last report we were only 2% higher, so this is kind of a sliding scale over time.
That is it's a good point to make, and I suppose that is the frustrating side of it all as well. Now, look, when we talk about water quality, frequently agriculture and the impact of agriculture on water quality gets brought up. So for our listeners' benefit, why is that? Why do we always talk about water quality and agriculture hand in hand? What impact does farming have on our water quality?
So I suppose to look at Ireland as a whole, if we have, Ireland is a diverse place, but if we look at our landscape, it's primarily agriculture. Now, there's a diversity within that agriculture, from tillage to dairy to suckler to other types of farm practices. But in general, agriculture dominates our landscape. So being the dominant landscape is obviously going to have the most influence on how our waters are performing. But to put it, I suppose, in context, we look at urban areas and we look at the human environment. Our urban wastewater treatment plants are responsible for around 200 rivers, say, nationwide, where we have issues, and we know where those issues are. But if we look at agriculture, we're talking about 1,000. So the scale of I suppose, influence that agriculture has on our water quality is quite large across the country.
And it is massive. And I know that there will be many within the farming community who hear these reports and think, oh God, here we go again. But there are also other reasons as to why we have particularly poor water quality in certain areas. And, we all, as residents of the island, have to take responsibility for it as well, don't we?
Yeah, so I suppose, to talk about it in the round, I suppose agriculture is one of them, and runoff of nutrients, sediment loss, and use of pesticides are the three main issues. but also land drainage, dredging, clearance of riparian zones. These are not necessarily exclusively agricultural practices, but they do happen a lot in our countryside. But obviously, discharges on poorly treated wastewater, urban treatment, poorly treated sewage from wastewater treatment plants is an issue, as well as domestic systems and storm overflows in our urban environment. And then also in our urban environment, we have runoff from our hard surfaces. Think about that long dry period. You get all that tire wear and other pollutants on the tarmac atom. It rains and that flushes into the system, causing pollution. And then in our uplands, in our more elevated areas, we have a lot of forestry, and some of these practices from time to time can cause issues as well.
It is disappointing that in the year 2025, we are still having issues with how our sewage is dealt with, and that it's still having an impact on water quality.
Yeah, so last week in a separate report, just to confuse things, the EPA published their urban wastewater report, and that talked about how practices at Iskearin could be improved to make sure that we don't have these, I suppose, discharges from time to time. But it has to be said that where these occur in most times of the year, it is not an issue. So these are kind of rolling challenges. We have called the Iskearin out in this. We've also called Iskearin out in terms of their investment and upscaling that investment. And we also call on the government to, provide that investment to Iskearin so that they can get their treatment plants up to date and get their employees and staff trained appropriately.
I know, and this is probably, on the smaller side of things, but there has been, amongst some development, and obviously we all need more housing, like there's no question about that. But you see when you travel up and down the country and you see in certain areas the fashion for concrete paving everywhere. And then even in people's gardens, because of maybe there's 2 cars, so there's no front lawn. All of that, the removal of anything that might previously have been soakage, that has an impact as well, doesn't it? Because it's rolling off concrete then into the waterways as opposed to being filtered by, the patch of grass on the lawn that would have happened previously.
Absolutely, yes. So I suppose the more, of ground that the water passes through, the better it is by the time it gets to our waterways. So any overland flow, be it across our concretes, our tarmac atoms, our driveways, our hard packed areas, these are I suppose a growing concern, but I suppose they are, to put in context, mostly limited to urban areas, our towns and our cities, and many of them are, I suppose, localized in that respect.
Now, I know that in terms of the canal waterways, and particularly in the Midlands, we have, the Royal Canal and the Grand Canal, they're actually in relatively good condition, and they're hitting their water targets. So there is some good news.
Yes, so our canals perform pretty well, and 87% or 14 of our 16 canal water bodies are good. 2 are currently at moderate, so Grand Canal, Naas and Corbally branch, and then part of the Grand Canal Basin then in Dublin. And these are failing due to chemical pollutants that have been found in the water over that 6 years. But in general, our canals are doing very well. They are measured slightly differently from our rivers and our lakes, but that's not to say that the measurement is any lesser or they're not getting off lightly, if that's kind of what I'm getting at.
And how do you, say for instance in the Grand Canal, you test the water and you find that there is some form of unusual chemical. What happens then? How do you track back how that came to be?
Well, normally when I say chemicals, generally what I mean is, so it'd be nutrients, so it'd be our nitrogen or phosphorus, and I know, so generally we know what the land around that is being used for, or what kind of industry or what kind of wastewater treatments are in the vicinity, where those pipes come out. So you can kind of distill down quickly where the issues will be. And generally what we do when we look at our canals or we look at our rivers, we move in a downstream direction. So we can kind of pinpoint where issues are by kind of ruling out one point, getting to the next point, there's an issue. And then, so you can, there's ways and means of doing it. And it's, we don't take one sample in one river and decide that river is now in a certain status. Usually there's multiple sampling points and there's multiple things measured. And it's kind of everything in the round together then gives us the broader picture of how a water body is doing ecologically and chemically.
And of course, our waterways are vital for biodiversity in the country. And of course, we know that Ireland has really suffered major biodiversity loss over the years. So it is very important that we have, that these waterways are being monitored by the likes of yourselves.
Yeah, so I suppose good water quality is critical for numerous things, biodiversity being one of them, providing us with clean water, so it costs less to treat this water that isn't polluted. It supports our health and our well-being. Think of walking along a nice babbling brook, it's good for your head, but it also supports all our industry and our economy. So if we don't have good, clean water, we don't have a strong, healthy, resilient industry and economy, which employs people across the country.
In fact, our good clean water has one of the reasons we have so many data centres in the country, because they need that for their servers, and that's a whole other kettle of fish, as they would say. But you mentioned there that you've been, like yourself and your colleagues in the EPA, it's not the first time you've released a report with, let's just say, negative findings. So then the question could be asked, like, why continue if the situation is continuing to deteriorate? What should we be doing to try and take action on it?
Well, funnily, there are lots of actions happening, and LawPro, our local area waters authority, and our local authorities are implementing measures. Some measures being some sort of action that is put in place to improve the quality of water in an area, and it might be a buffer zone along a river. It might be, putting in fencing to keep cattle out. There's many ways of doing it. And where this work is progressing, what we're seeing drops in nutrient concentrations, which is the first step in seeing improvements in our water quality. And generally, once we see the nutrients begin to drop, the ecology tends to follow thereafter. But there are multiple actions happening. So the Department of Housing last year released their River Basin Management Plan, or the Water Action Plan, as they've called it. And there's targeted measures specifically in that report, about 200 of them, that target problems across the country. And these will be specific to each water body and each locality, and they'll be specific to the problem in that locality. But there's other actions we can take. So in terms of nitrates action program, that has to start delivering in terms of our nutrient loss to our waters. Again, we've mentioned the accelerated and sustained investment needed by Uisce Éireann to improve our wastewater treatment. But there's also, we need a regulatory framework to look at physical change. So every time human activity changes the shape, the form, the flow of our rivers, our lakes, and our coastal areas, that has an impact on the ecology. So there's all of these things combined, and with each little change, we get a little positive, and with more of these positive steps, we should start to see water quality going the right way. So I suppose we have been given quite a negative message, but I suppose the positive take-home message is that if we target our measures and if we try and get the right solution in the right place, we get results.
And is it something that listeners can get involved in? Because I think, one of the positive, and I'm using that word loosely, effects of climate change becoming a more tangible issue for us all to face on a day-to-day basis, it has sparked community action and, communities getting together to, whether it's the local tidy towns to clean up litter or, maybe a beach clean-up. Can listeners get involved in, anything around the waterways and kind of do their bit as well? Or is it a case that we have to really allow the government agencies in to do this kind of work?
Well, I suppose I would look at it, yes, get involved in all these local communities. Many of them are doing great things on the ground. And I know the tidy towns now, in conjunction with the National Biodiversity Data Centre in Waterford, they have, biodiversity awards. And some of that relates to the, if you have a river running through your area or so there's lots of positive things communities can be done. I suppose in terms of our water quality, reporting problems to your local county council is always the first step, and I suppose the council knowing there might be a problem. If no one tells the local authorities there is a problem, sometimes it's not necessarily picked up. or it might be some time down the road before it's picked up. So I suppose the state is the primary driver of this, but I suppose we shouldn't put people off from making contact with our local communities, our local authorities, and indeed with ourselves, even though in general the local councils deal with the local problems. We kind of more seen as like the auditors, we kind of point out where the issues are in that respect.
It's a good point that you make, Hugh, though, because I see it myself, whether it's in WhatsApp groups or Facebook groups or X or Blue Sky, people go on social media and they give out and give out and give out about a particular issue, and they could very well be correct. But, that doesn't mean the council or the person responsible for tackling the issue is going to psychically find out just because you've posted about it on social media. Actually, the energy might be better spent just picking up the phone to the local council.
Oh, absolutely. And I suppose the more people that do it, the more pressure the council will be under then. They will respond, but I suppose, there's that weight of kind of numbers. And if we all know it's important, but it's no harm to remind constantly that it's important, if that makes sense. I don't want to sound critical that people aren't doing what they should be doing or anything. That's not what I'm getting at. But what I mean is there is that weight of, if there's a weight of expectation, that is often as good a driver as any to get actions done on the ground.
Well, Dr. Hugh Feeley, Scientific Officer with the EPA's Water Management Programme, thank you very much for taking the call and taking us through your latest report, Hugh.
Thank you, Aisling. Anytime.
We'll be back after the break.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
You're listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103, and I hope you're enjoying our show so far this week. Well, we have... what's it now? 3 or so days left in the presidential campaign for 2025. We have Heather Humphreys on behalf of Fine Gael and Catherine Connolly, an independent candidate backed by multiple parties in the opposition. Now, it's not a political show, but it is worthwhile checking in on both candidates' environmental policies and what their take on climate action is. And for us, we have Dr. Cara Augustenborg, and Cara is a Professor of Environmental Policy at UCD, but also a member of President Michael D. Higgins' Council of State. And Cara joins us now on the line. Cara, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Aisling. Great to be here.
Now, Cara, you did this on behalf of the electorate, let's just be honest about it. You put a request into both of the candidates' campaigns, asking them what?
Well, first of all, I should say that I wish I didn't have to do this, because I was really hoping that our media, our national broadcasters, would ask a climate question of our presidential candidates. So if you think about previous general elections, there's usually a set of questions around what are the candidates' climate policies and how are they going to approach what is the biggest existential crisis of humanity, really. And so I was waiting and waiting for the media to ask this question, and they haven't asked this question yet. Maybe by the time we broadcast this, they will have. Let's hope so. But in the meantime, I have students in a climate policy and politics module. We try and bring the elections in anytime there is an election during our class. So I went ahead and I wrote to the campaign teams and asked them to set out the positions of each of the candidates on climate policy. And it was quite an open-ended task. I didn't ask a series of questions. I let them say whatever they wanted to say. And luckily we live in a small democracy and our candidates are very accessible. So I did get very considered replies from both of them, about a page to 2 pages from each of them. And I've shared that on my own social media for everyone to see. But what I would say from my own analysis of what they sent is that they both have some engagement with the climate issue in their former jobs, but from 2 very, very different perspectives. And so in a sense, it's like comparing apples and oranges.
Okay. And we should say that we will try to do our best to outline the responses that you received in as fair a way as possible. So, Cara, let's take Catherine Connolly's responses first, and I'm purely going by. So, Cara, for anybody listening, is very active on LinkedIn. I think it's safe to say, Cara, it's a really good platform you've created for yourself there, and you have posted all of this on your LinkedIn profile. So if listeners would like to take a read of this after the fact, go on to LinkedIn and search for Dr. Cara Augustenborg there, and you will find this full printout there in nice and easy PDF format. So you've made it very accessible for us, Cara. But let's take Catherine Connolly's campaign's responses first. Can you summarise what she said to you for us?
Yeah, so Catherine Connolly's team gave me a couple pages, including a lot of hyperlinks to the actual documents where she had engaged in these issues. And you know, first of all, I thought it was interesting that she frames both climate change and biodiversity as emergencies. And I didn't ask about biodiversity, but she brought that in. She also brought issues like nature, you know, invasive species, water quality, linking all this to public health. So, you know, you could look at this two ways. You could say, okay, she's, you know, deflecting. I've asked her about climate policy and she's talking about other environmental issues, but I prefer to look at it as joined up thinking. So for decades, environmental issues have really suffered by being seen in silos, and sometimes we try and fix one problem and we end up making another problem worse, particularly like with things like climate and nature. So in her case, in her response, she very much joined all of those things together and gave me links to areas she had engaged in each of those. So in particular, regarding climate, just recently when Budget 2026 came out, she was in the Dáil criticizing the government for failing to acknowledge that this was a climate emergency and ignoring the limits of climate change in the budget. And then she gave a lot of examples of previous climate engagement, which were very locally focused. So we're talking about objections to the Galway City Ring Road, advocacy for a Galway Lewis, so very much, you know, local. And if you think about her role as an opposition TD, she's really, you know, advocating, she's holding the government accountable, but it's very hard to really actively change policy when you're kind of sitting on the sidelines in that role. So that was her perspective. I thought it was good that she ended by telling me what she would do as president in this regard, which is really what I want to know. And in that case, she said she was committed to spotlighting community projects, pressing for delivery on EU obligations, which was an interesting one, and then elevating environmental protection in national decision making.
Okay. So quite a thorough response in fairness to her campaign. And like she says that she, and as you've said, if she were elected, she treats climate and biodiversity loss as an emergency requiring delivery over rhetoric. So I think, you know, there's quite strong language in the response from Catherine Connolly's team. Now let's move on to Heather Humphreys. And what did she say to you? Or what did her team say to you, I should say?
So Heather Humphreys really took a, you know, completely different approach as someone who has been in government. She has been in the room where it all happens, right? Very different than sitting on the sidelines advocating and you know, working on accountability issues. So she really emphasized her response that it was rooted in her previous ministerial experience. And she fell to the fact that she was in the government that created the first national climate action plans in 2019. So she would have been part of the decision making on that as a member of cabinet. And she highlighted her own role in that as one where she was promoting a just transition. So in this case, she was really emphasizing social protection measures. So she said that she helped expand the fuel allowance and the child payments that were funded by the carbon tax. And then she promoted rural initiatives like broadband expansion and regeneration of heritage buildings. And she also mentioned that she took great pride in the fact that she secured funding for greenways and blueways in her area. So really relying on her role in government and the previous government's track record on that. I will say what she didn't include in her response, and when I did some digging on that track record, were things like the Heritage Bill, where broadcaster George Hook actually called her a flat earth minister and said she was ignoring science and damaging biodiversity by championing this Heritage Bill. You know, she was really promoting allowing more turf burning, allowing hedge cutting during inappropriate seasons. So there is a whole world of biodiversity that obviously wasn't mentioned in her response because I was asking about climate policy, but also is part of the track record of that government and particularly of her ministerial role at the time.
And she has said that she believes as first citizen, the president can help lead national efforts to reach a net zero carbon future. If honoured to be selected as president, I will use the office to progress community level climate friendly initiatives. Like it is, they've both stated what they would like to be able to do if they were elected as president. And given your own position as a member of the Council of State, Cara, and your own expertise in this area, what can the president do on climate action and biodiversity loss?
Yeah, it's interesting actually that they both mentioned promoting community level climate initiatives. And then what I also think is ironic is all the experience that they have, and they do have experience on climate issues. It's not things that a president can actually do, right? Because the president cannot set policy, which is what Heather Humphreys was doing, nor can it criticize the government publicly, which is what Connolly has been doing. So what a president can do is really influence tone, convene groups on certain issues, inspire. And I think we've really seen that from Michael D. Higgins. And, hopefully I'm not biased when I said this, but just watching him for the last 7 years in particular, he has really made climate a core focus of his work. So he works very closely with the UN Food and Agricultural Organization on food insecurity. He promotes the UN Sustainable Development Goals all the time. It's on the back of every Christmas card he sends. He's always celebrating local environmental organizers and trying to honor them and bring them together. And also, I will say that he has greened the Aris. So actually, they don't burn turf anymore. When I first started going there, they did burn turf. And they've done a very extensive biodiversity assessment. They've done an energy audit. So he has really tried to practice what he preaches and really use that role as a symbolic power to inspire change. Now, my own feeling in the responses from the candidates, neither of them were pushing that level of ambition when it came to climate policy, but nor have they been asked to by our media. So for me, that is really the bugbear here, is that I just want the media to press them on this and ask that simple question: how will you integrate climate change into your presidency? And really get a strong answer to that and make sure that that is a core focus of their presidency, as it has been for Michael D. Higgins, and I should add, as it has been for Mary Robinson over the last 15 years as part of her Climate Justice Foundation.
And the role of the president, like you say, you might not as president be able to create or implement new policies, but you can start national conversations on a particular issue. And that soft power can actually drive real change. So it will be very interesting to see if, these ambitions that you have received from both candidates, what they do with them, because either way, in just under a week's time, we'll find out who the next president of Ireland is going to be. And then we will have to watch this space and hold them to account on these promises.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, individuals, the people of Ireland asking the question of the candidates and writing to them and telling them this is an important issue to me, that is half the battle. That gets it into their minds. And we've heard the candidates say that they are going to be the voice of the people for Ireland. So letting them know what those priorities of the people are is really, really important.
And that's a really good point because, and I said this with my earlier guest on the show this week, but, we can all feel very frustrated on particular issues, whether it's that we don't feel the government's doing enough about tackling biodiversity loss or fixing the potholes in our local housing estate. But actually, if we don't pick up the phone, if we don't send the email, they don't understand that there is this sense of frustration. Venting on Facebook or any other social media platform, it doesn't really change anything. It doesn't get the message through to the right person. And we are, thankfully, in a very healthy democracy where we can have access to all our elected representatives.
Yeah, you can write an email and get a response, as I did. So, and I've noticed that Catherine Conley's team, when they wrote back to me, told me that their social media channels were going to be featuring climate change a lot in the following week. So, maybe those kind of emails do have an effect in that it gets them thinking, oh, we need to send messages out about this particular issue. So, but I would also like to see the media, as a responsibility to the public to ask this question, because everything is impacted by climate change or, can affect climate change. So there's always a climate question to be asked.
Well, Dr. Cara Augustenborg of UCD and, of course, President Michael D. Higgins, Council of State, thank you once again for joining us on Let's Go Green.
Thanks so much, Aisling.
We'll be back after the break.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
You're listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103, and we are joined now by Professor Yvonne Buckley, and Yvonne is here to speak to us about the latest report from the Climate Advisory Council highlighting the very serious condition our biodiversity sphere is here on the island. Yvonne, you are very welcome to the programme.
Thanks, Aisling.
Take me through your findings, because, it's safe to say it is quite stark reading, the latest report from the Climate Advisory Council.
Well, biodiversity is the variety of all life on Earth. It's all nature. And the reason why the Climate Change Advisory Council is concerned is because there's very important linkages between biodiversity and the climate. So healthy, functional ecosystems like forests and bogs actually help to regulate the climate. So they draw down carbon dioxide, which is a really potent greenhouse gas, draw that down and lock it away into their bodies, and they lock it away into the soil. So when biodiversity is not in a good, healthy condition, it affects the climate. So that's the reason why the Climate Change Advisory Council is so concerned here. Biodiversity can also do amazing jobs for us in adapting to the changes in climate that we're already seeing. So if we see, for example, more intense rainfall, warmer winters, drier summers, biodiversity can help us to cope with those conditions. So an intact, healthy bog can actually soak up these intense rainfall events and prevent flooding further downstream. So when our bogs are not in good condition, and less than a quarter of them are actually in a healthy, functioning condition, when they're not in a good condition, they can't actually help us to slow down or stop climate change, and they can't help us to adapt to the effects of climate change. So we know that biodiversity here in Ireland is not in great shape. Something like 85% of our protected habitats are in poor or inadequate condition. Nearly half of our water bodies are in unsatisfactory condition. And all of these, we see declining populations of insects, butterflies, and bees. So all of the metrics pretty much are going in the wrong direction for biodiversity. And that's why we're concerned.
And, we see, and as I'm listening to you speak there, I'm thinking about the community in Abbeyleix in County Laois, where, I don't know, was it 20 or 25 years ago, we're told absolutely no way, that bog is dead, there's nothing can be done. And they got together as a community to revive it. And it has been such a success story. But yet, it's out there on its own in many ways, and we need that across the island. What can now be done, or what should we be doing about this? Because it's one thing to say that they're in very poor health, but I suppose at this point we need to start working on it.
We need to get on with it. And actions do get taken, but it's not at the scale that we need to actually turn the tide. And you're absolutely right that when people take action, we can bring biodiversity back. So nature can come back. It's a really hopeful story. Abbeyleix Bog is a great example. There's lots of other examples all around the country of local communities, large consortia of European projects, all doing a fantastic job. And we saw just this year some great figures around corncrakes, and their numbers improving massively because of the restoration actions that people are taking on the land. And that's great, and that gives us hope. It's certainly not all negative. There's pockets of really excellent practice happening all over the country in terms of restoration, and we just need to upscale that now. We need to make it part of the normal way of doing things in all of our developments. So whenever we're looking at infrastructure, for example, looking at planning conditions, looking at new housing, we need to build biodiversity, build nature into those developments. So it becomes a normal part of doing business on our farms, in our cities, in our forests, on our bogs, on our coasts, that we're using, the power of nature to actually help us to live better lives. And if you build biodiversity into housing developments, for example, it's good for nature. It's really good for people because of the mental and physical health benefits of being exposed to nature, that are so important. And it's a win-win.
It's actually one thing I think that COVID taught us was the importance of access to green spaces and peaceful spaces. And I suppose what we need now, Yvonne, really is a mindset shift equivalent to, like, there was a time when smoking on buses or in the cinema was a completely normal day-to-day activity. Nobody batted an eyelid. Whereas nowadays, if you saw smoke or a hint of it in a cinema, you'd switch the fire alarm because you'd think the place, there was a danger. So I think as a nation, we need a massive mindset shift. And what you're speaking about there, it all needs to come into every practice.
That's it. So looking after biodiversity and looking after nature is not just the concern of one part of government or one part of society. It needs to cut across all of government. So it's great to see the National Parks and Wildlife Service getting an uplift in their budget over the last few years, and again in the most recent budget. But we also need to see, the Department of Housing taking biodiversity seriously when it's planning new housing developments. We need to see the Department of Agriculture doing more around biodiversity and building long-term plans in place to reward farmers for the work that they do on biodiversity, and make sure that they see that that's a long-term, it's not just a short-term flash in the pan, that they need the certainty that these payments are going to be in place, over the long term. Because
that is a challenge, isn't it? And I've heard farmers speak about being part of the Farm Plan Initiative, but that's in a 5-year cycle. And, farms in particular, they're not planned in 5-year cycles. The families have been on those farms for generations, and they want to know that if they make a change, that the future generation can participate and survive on it. So we do need a longer term thinking as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's very important. And that, biodiversity does need time to recover. We do see some quick wins, but a lot of the time when you're restoring habitats, it takes a while. It can take decades in some cases to get back what's been lost. So, and we need the certainty. The direction of travel needs to be set, and people can see that that's the way things are going, and they can make those long-term plans then and think about, intergenerational planning around their land.
How important is education for the general public around this? Because I know, I mentioned it on the show before, I bought a house this year. So a lot of my social media intake has been around interior design and, building and all that sort of thing. But we are in a new world where everything is done through social media, and we're being shown these, very, very aesthetically pleasing gardens or parks. And there's very little talk about the implication of those sanitised areas on biodiversity. So do we need to have a greater conversation around our role as citizens when it comes to biodiversity loss?
Absolutely. I think education is critically important. And it's not just education, which sounds a bit one way, like we're telling people what they should do. It's engagement. It's actually kind of opening up the world to people. It's showing them, things that they may have never noticed before all around them. And, we can use all of our senses to engage with nature, our hearing, our touch, our smell, our sight. It's actually a very immersive experience being in a natural area. But we also need to realize that messy can be okay sometimes, and that a very, very manicured garden or surrounds are not necessarily good for biodiversity and good for nature, and that messy can be okay. It's okay to have a pile of leaves in your garden, right? We've all got lots of leaves falling down at the moment. Leave it there for a little while. Let the animals have it, maybe push it all into one corner of the garden and leave it there. Our hedgehogs love a pile of leaves. Lots of insects love having a pile of leaves. Leave little homes for wildlife, or big homes for wildlife in your gardens, and get used to seeing long grass. Get used to actually enjoying seeing the flowers and the grass heads and things like that. They're all very positive things. And if we think about it positively, so rather than feeling like we can only admire a beautiful bowling green lawn, I think a mindset change is exactly right. What you're saying is that we need to recognize the beauty in the messiness of nature.
As difficult as that might be for some of us who are very familiar with tidy spaces. And I can say that myself, I love having tidy spaces. I find it stressful when things are messy, but it is that piece of work that we have to get our heads around.
Yeah. But it's okay to have a little tidy space. You can have your little regulated, beautifully manicured tidy space, and then have another space that's for nature, and you can then concentrate on your lovely tidy space and go, oh look, that's the nature bit over there.
Now, while I have you, I have to ask you about the Asian hornet, and I know there was quite a big concern around that in recent months. So where are we in relation to the Asian hornet? Because it was something that I think shocked a lot of people that actually it had been discovered in Ireland.
So I guess it's not all that surprising that it's been found in Ireland. So we have seen the Asian hornet moving quite rapidly through Europe into the Channel Islands. It's been found in the UK on numerous occasions. So it was really just a matter of time before we saw it in Ireland. But what we've learned from looking at how the Asian hornet has spread over other areas is we've learned that it can be controlled. If you find it quickly, you can eliminate it. And that's exactly what happened in Cork and Dublin and now in Northern Ireland. These Asian hornets have been found, which is a really, really good news story. They're being found. The nests were destroyed in Cork using technology, that we've learned from other places. So look, that's all actually very positive. And the coordinated response in Ireland when the hornets were found, I think, was really excellent between the National Biodiversity Data Centre, the National Parks and Wildlife Service, and their collaboration with their colleagues in Northern Ireland in the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. I think it's actually, it showed that our system works, which is really positive. Now, in terms of climate change, we're going to likely see more plants and animals and microbes coming in that would never have been able to survive here before. But now that our temperatures are increased, we have fewer frost days in the winter, for example, which, frost in winter can kill a lot of insect pests that might come in, and they wouldn't have been able to take hold before. But as the climate changes, more and more species will be able to survive here. So we're going to see more invasive species. And that's why it's so important to keep working on our biosecurity, keep working on our coordinated responses to invasive species incursions. And particularly to keep working, across the whole island of Ireland, because, these plants and animals, they don't respect borders, they don't show their passports, they don't...
They move where they want to.
Exactly right.
Well, Professor Yvonne Buckley of the Climate Change Advisory Council, if listeners want to find out more about your work and the work of the Advisory Council, how would they go about doing that?
So the Climate Change Advisory Council has a webpage, and you can just find that if you search for it. And all of our publications are published there. So you can see all of the documents that the Climate Change Advisory Council has been using for our own deliberations and that we are publishing ourselves. And
it is really hopeful to read, I think, from a listener's perspective, in that there's so much work being highlighted through your work. You're highlighting all the work that is being done to tackle climate change, and particularly, I think, when it can feel rather overwhelming, it is positive that we can highlight initiatives that are taking place and that are in fact working.
Absolutely. Everybody can do something in this space, and, together we can definitely make space for nature in our lives.
Well, Professor Yvonne Buckley of the Climate Change Advisory Council, thank you very much for joining us on Let's Go Green. We'll be back after the break.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
You're listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103. Just want to take a moment to remind you that if you would like to suggest an item for the show, if there is something that you feel we should be covering and we haven't done yet, please do feel free to get in contact with me. There are numerous ways, so if you happen to have a pen handy, you can email me directly. hello@thecommunicationscoach.ie. That's hello@thecommunicationscoach.ie, or hop over to midlands103.com, click on the On Air team page. You will find my name, Aisling O'Rourke, and a link to send me a message directly there. Or, of course, you could also give the station a call and the team will put you through to me. A little bit earlier, we spoke with Dr. Cara Augustenborg on the candidates in the presidential election come Friday and their promises in relation to climate action and biodiversity loss. Cara has posted the responses that she received from both the Catherine Connolly campaign and indeed Heather Humphreys' team on her LinkedIn, and she has also written about it in an article for thejournal.ie. So if you'd like to see or read those responses for yourselves, you can do so by finding Dr. Cara Augustenborg on LinkedIn, or indeed look up her article on thejournal.ie. It goes without saying, but still I'm going to say it. The election day is on Friday. Polling stations will open from 7 a.m. until 10 p.m. And regardless of how you vote, it is important that all of us over the age of 18 do practice our constitutional right to vote on Friday. And it's hard to believe that this time next week we will know who the 10th President of Ireland is going to be. Also on this week's show, we checked in on the latest report in relation to water quality across the island, conducted, of course, by the EPA, and their report is available on epa.ie. And, of course, we spoke with Professor Yvonne Buckley of the Climate Change Advisory Council on their latest findings in terms of biodiversity loss. And it is a topic that we will be coming back to here on the show, and it is something that unfortunately is becoming more and more urgent. And again, the Climate Change Advisory Council has all of their reports available there for you to read them if you would like to find out more. Of course, if you missed any of this week's episode of Let's Go Green, you can listen back on your preferred podcast platform, whether that's midlands103.com, Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or even on YouTube Podcasts. I know it's available on all the relevant podcatchers, I think is the correct term these days. So please do, if you are listening to us as a podcast, be sure to write some comments, give us a star rating, and share it with your friends and family. And if you're feeling particularly generous, we'd also love it if you could share a review of Let's Go Green with myself, Aisling O'Rourke. I'm afraid that is all we have time for on this week's episode of the show. We won't have an episode next week due to the bank holiday, which has come up completely all of a sudden on me. And to be totally honest, I was booking things into my calendar for next week's show and I realised that it was a bank holiday. So I hope you have a lovely long weekend. I'm looking forward to it myself. And we will be back on the first Monday in November. Take care, have a great week, and I look forward to speaking to you again in November here on Let's Go Green on Midlands 103.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.